All right, boys and girls, today's story is Molly Bannaky by Alice McGill and Chris K. Sostenpate. Sostenpate? I'm not sure how to pronounce that correctly. Sorry. And I want you to think about what can you learn about history from this narrative. So I'm going to share with you again a book from the genre of historical fiction. It is a fiction piece, however, like many historical fictions, the author heavily researched the subject and then wrote this, okay? Molly Bannaky really did exist. And the events in here happened, but some of the conversation or the exact experiences are subject to inferences on the part of the author, who then created the narrative to fold in the truths, okay? So be mindful of that. But I think it depicts a part of early American history after the colonies have been established, but during the time of slavery, that we miss. We have a certain narrative, a thought in our head about how slavery happened or what was happening in the rest of the United States while slavery was going on in the southern states. This story kind of turns some of our beliefs on its ears, and I think it's a really great story to share. So without further ado, think about what can you learn about history from this narrative. On a cold gray morning in 1683, Molly Walsh sat on a stool tugging at the udder of an obstinate cow. She was a dairymaid, and it was her duty to get up every morning around 5 o'clock and go to that same shed and milk that same cow. The man who owned the cow owned the cottage where she lived, the manor house, and all the land around. He was Lord. So right now she's in England, just from the fact that there are lords. So she owns nothing. Interesting. Molly kept tugging. The milk squirted into the pail. When the pail was full, it was her duty to take it up the hill to the manor house and hand it to the scullery maid, who handed it to the kitchen maid, who handed it to the cook. The jittery cow kept hooking its head. The week before, the cow had kicked over her pail of milk. The cook had warned Molly that she would be brought before the court if ever again she stole his lordship's milk. That was the law. So did she steal the lordship's milk? Sounds like there was an accident. Interesting. Seems kind of severe. Molly's shawl was thin. Her hands were very cold. But at last the pail was full to the frothy brim. Suddenly, Molly sneezed. The cow jumped. The pail tipped over, and the milk seeped into the damp ground. Before the sun had set that day, Molly stood before the court. The usual penalty was death on the gallows, but no one who could read the Bible could be executed for stealing. So a Bible was offered to her. That, too, was the law. Molly's voice rang out clear and true. So boys and girls, back in her country, if she stole her lord's milk by, the cow kicking it over, she could be sentenced to death if she couldn't read the Bible. That doesn't sound like a very free person to me. Just saying. Her life was spared, but the justice sentenced Molly to 7 years of bondage, to be served in a colony across the ocean. Having no family, Molly Walsh, age 17, said goodbye to England and boarded a ship. So the 17-year-old white girl is being sent to a foreign country to serve 7 years in bondage, which means basically slavery. She has no choice. She has to work off her debt of letting the cow kick over the milk. Seems reasonable. It's how we treat people. After she landed in the New World, Molly worked for a planter on the eastern shore of Maryland. There, the cannons fired at daybreak, calling the servants to work. Molly tended her master's tobacco crops, pressing the tiny brown seeds into the earth and picking the worms from the flowering stalks. Her calloused hands grew strong enough to control a team of oxen and to hold the plow steady. In her spare time, Molly sewed and nursed the sick for pay. So here she is with her oxen, working tobacco fields. After working for the planter for 7 years, Molly was free to go. As the law required, the farmer gave her an ox hitched to a cart, a plow, 2 hoes, a bag of tobacco seeds, a bag of seed corn, clothing, and a gun. Acres and acres of fertile land stretched ahead of her. Just before sunset that same day, Molly left the road and went 4 miles into the wilderness, where she staked her claim. I think that's super impressive. She's like, yep, got my stuff, gonna just start my life. That a lone woman should stake land was unheard of, but Molly's new neighbors saw the way she jutted out her chin. They helped her build a 1-room cabin. They helped her harvest and cure her first crop. They helped her cart the tobacco to the warehouse to sell. But Molly soon realized that the farm was too much for her to manage alone. One day, Molly read a post announcement that a ship would be landing soon. Because she needed help in working her land, she decided to watch the docking of this ship, a slave ship. She watched the men of Africa file by, one after the other. She saw the misery, anger, and shame on their faces as they were forced to mount the auction block. Then Molly noticed a tall, regal man who dared to look into the eyes of every bidder. Molly bought him and vowed to treat him well and set him free just as soon as her land was cleared. I wonder if because she herself was in bondage and was treated very poorly by her lord, that she has a different opinion about people having rights over you. Oops. I think I skipped a page. Hang on, friends. Nope. Molly talked to this man, using her hands and arms to tell him of her homeland and of her years as an indentured servant. He smiled at this strange-looking woman with sweet grass eyes and straw hair and skin the color of the underside of a melon. He told her his name, Bannaky. Because he was not used to the climate, he was often sick with chills and fever. Still, Bannaky would walk up and down the rows of tobacco, stopping to turn each leaf on a stalk as if to read a printed page. He showed Molly how to dig ditches to guide streams of water down the furrows. Poor man had to adjust to terrible weather. I wonder if he had gotten sick with something on the ship or was bitten by a mosquito. I always ask myself questions as I read. It makes it more interesting. And look, Molly continues to work hard. She's not sitting back. As the tobacco ripened in the fields, Molly and Bannaky grew to love each other. She signed his freedom papers, and a traveling minister performed their marriage rites. Though Molly had broken colonial law by marrying a black man, her neighbors came to accept this marriage and to respect Bannaky. In times of drought, he shared his knowledge of irrigation and crop rotation, learned at an early age in his native country. So I think that's interesting because our perceptions maybe about the African American slaves as they were taught by their white masters, because that's what they were called, how to do everything. And yet they themselves came with a lot of knowledge that would have helped because they had a culture and habits and ways of doing things that worked also. Years passed. Molly and Bannaky had 4 young daughters. A large house and many outbuildings overlooked their 100 acres of land. Suddenly, a great sadness struck the family. Bannaky died, and Molly was alone again. She drew her daughters closer to her and taught them how to work the land. In time, she had a grandson, born of her eldest daughter, Mary, and her husband, Robert. In her Bible, Molly wrote her new grandson's name, Benjamin Bannaker. She taught this young boy to read and write. She told him about his grandfather, a prince who was the son of a king in Africa, and about her days as a dairymaid across the ocean in England. There's a picture. So now there's the historical note. This is where we find out what the author researched to create this story. So I'd love to share that with you as well. Historical note. In the late 17th century, many people from England chose to leave the hunger and poverty of their country. They became servants in the American colonies, where laborers were desperately needed. In exchange for sea passage, indentured servants agreed to work for 7 years, after which time they were declared free. Some, such as Molly Walsh, became indentured servants when they were exiled from England by law. Molly herself escaped death on the gallows by a legal loophole. She could read the Bible. And so her life was spared. It was the responsibility of the court to supply the Bible, as many poor people did not own them. Many years later, after she became a free woman, Molly purchased a Bible from England. After a grueling 2-month voyage below decks of a ship, where crowded and unsanitary conditions often led to disease, the 7-year passengers were sold to owners who were required to provide them with food, shelter, and clothing. At the end of their term, bonded servants were given all that was needed to start again on their own. We heard what Molly got, right? Often they moved farther west and staked claims, so she went 4 miles west. Settlers could pay for land after their first crop was sold. African slaves had no such options. They were treated as property for the duration of their lives. Under their laws, colonists could be forced into slavery for marrying a slave. Though Molly Bannaky was never prosecuted for this crime, Molly also feared retribution from disapproving neighbors. Bannaky never converted to Christianity, and as the nearest church was in Baltimore, it is thought that a traveling minister married them privately. Because Bannaky was free, their 4 children were born free. Their eldest daughter, Mary, also married an African slave, Robert. When Robert became a baptized Christian, the planter who owned him set him free. Free to marry, free to own land, free to come and go as he pleased. Having no last name, Robert took his wife's name, Bannaky. By the time their first son was born, the spelling of their name had changed to Bannaker. Taught to read from his grandmother's cherished Bible, Benjamin Bannaker, 1731 to 1806, went on to become a highly regarded scientist and mathematician. He taught himself astronomy and surveying and was appointed to the Federal Surveying Commission that planned Washington, D.C. Benjamin Bannaker is best known for calculating ephemerides, tables that use the locations of sun, moon, and stars to measure time. From the year 1792 to 1802, he published an almanac, the first by a black man, featuring these astronomical tables as well as scientific essays. Benjamin Bannaker wanted to disprove the popular belief that blacks were inferior to whites in intelligence. In 1791, he wrote to the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, which you all know later became president, concerning the injustice of slavery, enclosing one of his almanacs, Jefferson answered, agreeing with Benjamin Banneker, and sent a copy of the almanac to the Academy of Science in Paris. So I'll show you that too, because it's just cool. So this is like a little essay written by the author sharing what she had researched that inspired her to create this story, this fiction. Okay, so the genre of this book is historical fiction. We learned a lot about another aspect of colonial America and how it was founded by many men and women who were brought to this country possibly against their will. She was sent here in bondage. It may have turned out better for her, but who knows if she would have preferred to stay in England. And certainly Banneker did not have any desire to be here. He wanted to be in his own country with his own cultures and his own systems of doing things. But they made the best of it, and their life and their grandson did very well. So I want you to think about this story and how does it fit into your knowledge so far of colonial America and slavery in general. Yeah, that will do it. Take care. Happy reading. Bye.